Marcus Johnson checked his watch as he walked through the busy airport terminal. After 15 years of military service, the decorated Air Force veteran was finally heading home from his last official ceremony. The weight of his service medals felt good on his navy blue blazer, small reminders of the sacrifices he had made for his country. Gate B12, right on time, Marcus said to himself as he approached the boarding area. He had splurged on a first-class ticket as a gift to himself. After years of cramped military transport flights, he was looking forward to a comfortable journey home. When his boarding group was called, Marcus presented his ticket to the gate agent with a smile. The agent nodded politely and wished him a pleasant flight. As he walked down the jetway, Marcus felt a sense of pride. At 42, he had accomplished so much. His military career, his MBA degree, and his growing consultation business specializing in aviation operations. The cabin of the airplane was cool and quiet. Marcus found his seat -3A, a window seat in the first-class cabin. He stored his small carry-on bag in the overhead compartment and settled into the spacious leather seat. A few other passengers in first class were already enjoying pre-flight drinks. "Excuse me," Marcus said politely to a flight attendant passing by. "Could I have some water, please?" The flight attendant, a woman in her 50s with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, glanced at Marcus. Her name tag read Patricia. She paused, her eyes moving from his face to his seat number and back again. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" Patricia asked, her voice carrying through the cabin. A few nearby passengers looked up. Marcus blinked, surprised by the question. "Yes, I'm in 3A. Here's my boarding pass." He pulled out his ticket from his jacket pocket and showed it to her. Patricia barely glanced at it. "This is the first-class cabin," she said, her tone suggesting he might not understand. "Coach boarding is not for another 20 minutes. "I'm aware this is first class," Marcus replied calmly. "That's what I purchased. As you can see from my boarding pass, I'm in the correct seat." The flight attendant's lips tightened into a thin line. She looked at the boarding pass again, then at Marcus's face. By now, several passengers were watching the exchange. An older man across the aisle frowned in concern. "Is there a problem?" a woman in seat 2B asked. Patricia ignored her. "I'll need to verify this," she said to Marcus, her tone becoming increasingly cold. "These seats are premium seats." Marcus sat straighter in his chair. "Yes, I'm aware. I paid for this premium seat." "People don't usually," Patricia began, then stopped herself. "Let me check with the lead flight attendant." As Patricia walked away, Marcus took a deep breath. This wasn't the first time he had faced such treatment, but it still stung. The medals on his chest, earned through blood and sacrifice, apparently meant nothing to some people who couldn't see past the color of his skin. "Are you okay?" asked the woman in 2B. Her kind eyes met his. "Just a misunderstanding, I'm sure," Marcus said diplomatically, though his stomach had knotted with tension. A few minutes later, Patricia returned with another flight attendant, a younger man named Carlos according to his name tag. Carlos smiled at Marcus. "I apologize for any confusion, sir," Carlos said. "Can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" Marcus nodded. "Water would be great, thank you." Patricia stood behind Carlos, her expression hard as stone. As Carlos left to get the water, she leaned closer to Marcus. "We'll be watching you," she whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. "Any trouble, and you'll be removed." Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his face neutral. What had begun as a celebration was quickly turning into something else entirely. Marcus sipped his water slowly, trying to calm his nerves. The other passengers in first class were being served drinks and warm towels. Patricia moved through the cabin, smiling and chatting with everyone except him. A businessman in a gray suit sat down in the seat next to Marcus. He nodded politely before taking out his laptop. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came over the speaker. "We're expecting a smooth flight to Atlanta today. Weather looks good, and we should be arriving on time. Flight attendants, please prepare for takeoff." As the airplane began to push back from the gate, Marcus closed his eyes. He just wanted to get home without any more trouble. The medals on his chest felt heavier now. Carlos came by to collect trash before takeoff. He smiled apologetically at Marcus. "Everything okay, sir?" "Fine, thank you," Marcus replied. Patricia appeared suddenly behind Carlos. "I'll handle this section," she said sharply. Carlos hesitated, then nodded and moved to another part of the cabin. "Sir, I need you to remove those pins from your jacket," Patricia said, pointing to his military medals. Marcus frowned. "These are military service medals, not pins. I've never been asked to remove them on a flight before." "They could be dangerous during turbulence," Patricia insisted. "Airlines have rules." The businessman next to Marcus looked up from his laptop. "I fly weekly, and I'd never heard of that rule," he said. Patricia glared at him. "I wasn't speaking to you, sir." She turned back to Marcus. "Remove them now, or we'll have a problem." Marcus felt his heart pounding, but he kept his voice level. "May I see this rule in writing, please? As I said, I've flown many times with my medals." "Are you refusing to follow crew instructions?" Patricia's voice rose. "That's a federal offense." By now, several passengers had their phones out. A woman across the aisle was openly recording the interaction. "I'm not refusing anything," Marcus said calmly. "I'm simply asking to see the regulation that requires me to remove military honors from my clothing." "You people always make everything so difficult," Patricia muttered, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Marcus froze. "Excuse me? What do you mean by you people?" The businessman next to Marcus put his laptop away. "Ma'am, I don't think that's appropriate." Patricia ignored him. "I'm calling the captain. This passenger is being disruptive and refusing to comply with safety instructions." "That's not true," said the woman recording. "We're all witnesses here." But Patricia had already picked up the cabin phone. She spoke quietly for a moment, then hung up with a satisfied look on her face. "The captain has made his decision," she announced. "Security will escort this passenger off the plane." Gasps came from around the cabin. Marcus sat stunned. This couldn't be happening. "This is outrageous," said the businessman. "You did nothing wrong." "Sir, this doesn't concern you," Patricia shot back. Two security officers appeared at the front of the cabin. The plane, which had been taxiing toward the runway, now turned around and headed back to the gate. "I can't believe this," Marcus said quietly, gathering his small bag from under the seat. His hands were trembling slightly, but he was determined not to show how upset he was. As he stood, several passengers spoke up. "This is wrong. We're all watching this. I got the whole thing recorded." One elderly woman stated firmly, "Young man, get their names." "All of them." Marcus nodded. He turned to Patricia. "May I have your full name and employee number, please?" Patricia's face flushed. "You'll be hearing from our legal department if you try to cause trouble." "I just want to properly document what's happening," Marcus replied. His military training had taught him to stay calm in crisis, to gather information, to think strategically. "I'd also like the captain's name and the names of the security officers." As Marcus was escorted down the aisle, phones recorded his dignified exit. He held his head high, medals gleaming under the cabin lights. What Patricia didn't know was that Marcus Johnson wasn't just any passenger. In addition to his military service, he had spent the last 5 years building a successful aviation consulting business. And he had just experienced firsthand exactly what was wrong with this airline. The jetway felt unusually long as Marcus walked between the two security officers. His face remained calm, but inside, a storm of emotions raged. Anger, humiliation, and disbelief fought for dominance. The small crowd waiting to board the flight watched with curious eyes as he was escorted through the gate area. "Sir, we need you to come with us to the security office," said the taller officer, a man with a buzz cut and tired eyes. "May I ask why I'm being removed from the flight?" Marcus kept his voice steady. "I followed all instructions and broke no rules." The second officer, shorter with gray at his temples, looked uncomfortable. "We were told you were being disruptive and refused crew instructions." "That's not true," Marcus replied, and several passengers recorded the entire interaction. He straightened his shoulders. "I'd like both of your names and badge numbers, please." The officers exchanged glances. The older one nodded slightly. "I'm Officer Wilson, badge number 8742, said the gray-haired man. "This is Officer Ramirez, badge 6390. Marcus committed the information to memory. "Thank you. I appreciate your professionalism." As they walked through the terminal, a young woman hurried to catch up with them. She was wearing a business suit and carried a small carry-on bag. "Excuse me," she called. "I was on that flight. I recorded what happened." The officers stopped. The woman held out her phone to Marcus. "I'm Sarah Kim. I'm a lawyer. That flight attendant was completely out of line, and I had it all on video. I also have the contact information of 4 other passengers who witnessed everything." Marcus felt a wave of relief. "Thank you," he said sincerely. Officer Wilson cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we still need to process this situation according to protocol." "Of course," Sarah replied, handing Marcus her business card. "But I want you both to know that I'm formally offering to serve as a witness that this gentleman did absolutely nothing wrong." "Noted," said Ramirez, looking increasingly concerned. They continued to the airport security office, a small room with blank walls and uncomfortable chairs. Inside, a man in an airline uniform was waiting. His name tag identified him as Jeff Parker, customer service manager. "Mr. Johnson?" Parker asked, checking a clipboard. "I understand there was an incident on Flight 1382. "Yes," Marcus answered, taking a seat. "Though not the incident as it was likely reported to you." Parker frowned. "The captain made the decision to remove you after you refused to comply with crew instructions and became verbally aggressive." Marcus shook his head. "That's completely false. I have witnesses and video evidence showing that I remained calm and respectful throughout the entire interaction. The flight attendant, Patricia, made racially charged comments and demanded I remove my military service medals without citing any actual regulation." Parker's eyes flicked to the medals on Marcus's chest, then back to his face. "Military service medals?" "Yes, I'm returning from my retirement ceremony after 15 years of service." Officer Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the passenger who followed us here corroborates this story. She has video." Parker's professional demeanor faltered. I see." He cleared his throat. "Mr. Johnson, I apologize for the inconvenience. We can get you rebooked on the next available flight." Marcus leaned forward. "Mr. Parker, this wasn't an inconvenience. This was discrimination, plain and simple." His voice remained calm but firm. "I need several things to happen now." He counted off on his fingers. "First, I need written documentation of this incident, including the names of all staff involved. Second, I need contact information for your corporate legal department. Third, I'd like a copy of your company's non-discrimination policy." Parker looked startled. "Sir, I'm sure we can resolve this without." "I'm not looking to be difficult," Marcus interrupted. "I'm looking to be thorough. As an aviation business consultant with an MBA, I understand both the legal and public relations implications of what just happened." At the mention of his profession, Parker's face paled slightly. Marcus hadn't planned to mention his job, but he needed the airline to take this seriously. "I'll get you everything you need," Parker said quickly. As Parker left to gather the requested information, Marcus checked his phone. Already, messages were coming in from fellow passengers. The videos were spreading, first through text messages and emails, and soon, he knew, to social media. Marcus took a deep breath. This wasn't how he planned to spend today, but perhaps it was happening for a reason. Sometimes leadership meant standing up when it would be easier to stay silent. And Marcus Johnson had never been one to stay silent in the face of injustice. By midnight, Marcus's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. He sat in his hotel room. The airline had put him up for the night after rebooking him on a morning flight, staring at the screen in disbelief. The video of his removal from the plane had gone viral. It had started on social media, but had now been picked up by several news websites. "Decorated veteran kicked off flight after racial profiling incident," read one headline. Another declared, "Airline under fire after black military veteran removed without cause." Marcus rubbed his tired eyes. This wasn't what he had wanted. He had simply hoped to get home after his retirement ceremony. Now he was at the center of a growing storm. His phone rang. The caller ID showed his sister, Tanya. "Marcus, are you okay? I just saw the video on the news." Tanya's voice was filled with concern. "I'm fine, just tired," Marcus assured her. "It's been a long day." "Those people should be ashamed of themselves," Tanya said angrily. "After everything you've done for this country." Marcus sighed. "It's not about my service, Tanya. No one should be treated that way, veteran or not. After promising to call her tomorrow, Marcus hung up. Almost immediately, the phone rang again. This time, it was a number he didn't recognize. "Hello, this is Marcus Johnson," he answered cautiously. "Mr. Johnson, this is Lisa Chen from Good Morning America. We'd like to have you on our show tomorrow morning to discuss your experience." Marcus was stunned. "Good Morning America wants me on the show." "Yes, sir. Your story has resonated with a lot of people. We can send a car to pick you up at 5 a.m. More calls followed. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC. They all wanted interviews. Marcus finally turned his phone off around 2 a.m. and tried to sleep, but his mind kept racing. At 7 a.m., showered and dressed in his best suit, Marcus sat in the Good Morning America studio. The medals that had caused so much trouble were pinned neatly to his chest. A makeup artist had just finished powdering his face to reduce shine under the bright lights. "We're live in 3, 2, 1. The floor director called. "Welcome back," said the host, a woman with a warm smile. "This morning we're joined by Marcus Johnson, an Air Force veteran whose shocking experience on a flight yesterday has gone viral. Mr. Johnson, thank you for being here." "Thank you for having me," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Can you tell us what happened yesterday?" Marcus took a deep breath. He had thought carefully about what to say. He wouldn't let anger guide his words. "Yesterday, I was removed from a flight after a flight attendant singled me out, questioned whether I belonged in first class, and eventually demanded I remove my military service medals. When I calmly asked to see the regulation requiring this, she called security, claiming I was being disruptive." "The video clearly shows you were very composed throughout the incident," the host noted. "I tried to be," Marcus said. "My military training taught me to stay calm under pressure. But I have to say, it was a humiliating experience." "What do you want to happen now?" This was the question Marcus had prepared for most carefully. His answer would set the tone for everything that followed. "I don't want revenge," he said firmly. "What I want is accountability and change. This isn't just about one flight attendant or one airline. It's about a culture that allows these incidents to happen repeatedly across our country." He paused, then continued with passion in his voice. "I spent my career in service, first to my country, and now as an aviation business consultant helping airlines improve their operations. I know firsthand that most airline employees are hardworking, dedicated professionals, but systems fail when bias goes unchecked." The host nodded. "Well said. And I understand you have an MBA and work as a consultant in the aviation industry. That gives you a unique perspective on this situation." "It does," Marcus agreed. "And that's why I want to be part of the solution. Airlines need better training, better policies, and better accountability. If my experience can help drive that change, then something good can come from this unfortunate incident." As the interview continued, Marcus spoke with clarity and dignity. He didn't call for boycotts or lawsuits. Instead, he outlined practical steps the airline industry could take to prevent similar incidents. By the time the interview ended, social media was exploding with support for Marcus Johnson. His thoughtful, measured response had resonated with people across the political spectrum. What had begun as a horrible experience was transforming into something else entirely. The executive boardroom of Skyway Airlines buzzed with tension. 8 people sat around a large wooden table, faces grim as they stared at the stock ticker displayed on the wall screen. Skyway shares have plummeted 11% since the market opened that morning. "This is a disaster," said Richard Connors, the airline's CEO, loosening his tie slightly. "The videos have been viewed over 20 million times. #boycott Skyway is trending nationwide." Melissa Washington, head of public relations, nodded grimly. "We've received over 40,000 messages in the last 24 hours. Major corporate clients are threatening to cancel their business travel contracts." "Has anyone actually talked to this Johnson guy?" asked James Miller, the company's chief financial officer. "Can't we just offer him some money and make this go away?" Tori Reynolds, the airline's legal counsel, shook her head. "It's not that simple. He's given 3 national television interviews this morning alone. He's not angry or vengeful. He's articulate, reasonable, and extremely knowledgeable about airline operations." "What do you mean?" Connors asked. Reynolds pulled up a tablet and read from her notes. Marcus Johnson, age 42. 15 years in the Air Force, retired as a lieutenant colonel, MBA from Wharton. Runs Johnson Aviation Consulting, which specializes in helping airlines improve their operations and customer experience. Several major airlines are his clients, though we're not one of them. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. You're telling me we racially profiled and kicked off a plane someone who actually consults for the airline industry? Connors asked slowly. Yes, Reynolds confirmed. And he's presenting himself as a problem solver, not a victim. That's making him extremely sympathetic to the public. Connors rubbed his temples. What about the flight attendant? Patricia Winters, right? What's her story? Melissa from PR grimaced. We've reviewed her file. There have been 3 previous complaints about her treatment of minority passengers. All were resolved with minor disciplinary actions. 3 previous complaints? Connors' voice rose. Why wasn't she fired or at least retrained? Different management team at the time, explained Robert Chen, the head of human resources. But it's going to look terrible when the media finds out. Which they will, Reynolds added. Several journalists have already filed requests for her employment records. Connors stood up and paced around the table. So we have a decorated military veteran with an MBA who consults for airlines, who was humiliated and removed from our plane due to racial bias by an employee with a history of similar behavior. And now our stock is tanking, customers are furious, and corporate partners are threatening to leave. That sums it up, Reynolds confirmed. We need to fire Patricia Winters immediately, said Miller, the CFO. Already done, Chen replied, but that doesn't solve our larger problem. The door to the boardroom opened, and a young assistant rushed in, looking anxious. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. Marcus Johnson is giving another interview on CNN right now. She grabbed a remote and turned on the large TV on the wall. Marcus appeared on screen, looking calm and professional in his suit with his military medals. I don't want Skyway Airlines to just fire one employee and consider the matter closed, Marcus was saying. This is about systemic issues. Their own data would likely show patterns of bias in how their rules are enforced and who gets removed from flights. The CNN anchor nodded. And do you plan to sue the airline? I'm keeping all options open, Marcus replied thoughtfully. But my goal isn't financial compensation. My goal is meaningful change. As someone who has worked in aviation consulting for years, I know that airlines can do better. This is an opportunity for Skyway to lead the industry in addressing these issues. Connors muted the TV and turned to his executive team, his face grave. This isn't going away with an apology and a settlement, he said. We need a completely different approach. What are you thinking? Reynolds asked. Connors looked around the room. I'm thinking we need to talk to Marcus Johnson, not as someone to appease, but as someone who might actually help us fix what's clearly broken in our company. The executives exchanged surprised glances. It was an unusual approach, but these were unusual circumstances. Get him on the phone, Connors decided. Today, Marcus sat in the hotel lobby, reviewing his notes for his upcoming meeting with Skyway's legal team. The call from CEO Richard Connors yesterday had surprised him. Instead of offering a quick settlement to make the problem disappear, Connors had asked for a face-to-face meeting to discuss substantial changes to the airline's practices. Marcus shook his hand firmly. Thank you for the invitation. As introductions went around the table, Marcus noted the somber, respectful tone. These weren't people preparing for battle. They seemed genuinely concerned. Before we begin, said Connors, I want to personally apologize for what happened to you on our airline. It was unacceptable, inexcusable, and contrary to everything we claimed to stand for. Marcus nodded. I appreciate that, but I'm more interested in actions than apologies. As are we, Connors replied, which is why we prepared something different than what you might expect. Tori Reynolds, the legal counsel, slid a folder across the table. This contains our standard settlement offer. It includes financial compensation, lifetime flying privileges, and all the usual terms. Marcus glanced at the document but didn't open it. However, Connors continued, we're not here to simply throw money at this problem and hope it goes away. We've done our research on you, Mr. Johnson. We know about your military service, your education, and your consulting work with other airlines. He leaned forward. We have a different proposal. Instead of just compensating you for your experience, we'd like to hire your firm to help us fix the underlying problems. Marcus raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. You want to hire me? Yes, said Robert Chen, the HR director. We've reviewed our incident reports over the past 5 years. We found disturbing patterns in how our policies are enforced and who bears the brunt of that enforcement. We need someone with your expertise to help us make real changes, added Melissa from PR. Not just better training videos or new slogans, but fundamental reforms to our operations. Marcus studied their faces, looking for signs of insincerity. He found none. What exactly would this engagement involve? He asked cautiously. Connors smiled slightly. That's exactly the right question. We're prepared to create a new position. Special Advisor for Operational Integrity and Inclusion. You would report directly to me, with authority to review any aspect of our operations, from hiring and training to policy enforcement and customer complaint resolution. You want me to be an internal watchdog? Marcus clarified. More than that, Connors said. We want you to be an architect of change. Your contract would guarantee you complete independence, substantial resources, and real authority to implement your recommendations. Marcus leaned back in his chair, mind racing. This was not at all what he had expected. Why should I trust that you're serious about this? He asked bluntly. This could easily be a PR move to neutralize me and the negative attention I'm bringing. James Miller, the CFO, spoke up. That's a fair concern. That's why any agreement would include public accountability metrics. Your progress reports would be published quarterly. If we fail to implement your recommendations, you would have the right to terminate the relationship and speak publicly about why. Marcus nodded slowly. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a document of his own. As it happens, I prepared something for this meeting as well, he said, handing copies to everyone at the table. This is my analysis of what went wrong in my situation and how it reflects systemic issues throughout Skyway's operations. The executives flipped through the 20-page document with growing interest. This is remarkably thorough, Connors said, looking impressed. You prepared this in 3 days? When you've been consulting for as long as I have, you develop a sense for where to look, Marcus replied. Page 15 has my preliminary recommendations. If we were to work together, this would be my starting point. The room fell silent as the executives read his proposals. Marcus watched their reactions carefully. Some nodded, others frowned in concentration, but no one seemed dismissive. Finally, Connors looked up. Mr. Johnson, would you be willing to step outside with Ms. Torres for a few minutes while we discuss this? Marcus agreed and followed Alicia to a small waiting area with a view of the city. As he gazed out at the skyline, he wondered if he was making the right move. Working from within the system had its risks. He could be co-opted, sidelined, or blamed if changes didn't come fast enough. But it also offered a chance to create real, lasting change, not just at Skyway, but potentially throughout the industry. 20 minutes later, Alicia returned. They're ready for you, Mr. Johnson. Marcus sat at his new desk, overlooking the bustling operations center of Skyway Airlines. 3 months had passed since he had accepted the position of Special Advisor for Operational Integrity and Inclusion. The brass nameplate on his door still felt strange to him, a reminder of how quickly life could change. Mr. Johnson, your 10 o'clock is here, said Dinah, his assistant. Send them in, please, Marcus replied, straightening his tie. The door opened, and a group of 15 flight attendants entered. They were the first Culture Champions cohort, employees selected from different backgrounds to help implement Marcus's new training program throughout the company. Good morning, everyone, Marcus greeted them warmly. Thank you for volunteering to be part of this initiative. Marcus smiled. It was a question he had heard many times. Change happens in 2 ways, he explained. From the outside through pressure, or from the inside through influence. Both are necessary. I chose the path where I thought I could make the biggest difference. For the next hour, Marcus outlined his vision. The program wasn't just about avoiding discrimination. It was about creating a culture where every employee felt empowered to speak up when they saw problems and where customer service was truly equal for everyone. As the meeting ended, Marcus checked his watch. he had another important appointment, a monthly progress review with CEO Richard Connors. The executive floor was becoming familiar territory now. Connors greeted him with a firm handshake. "Marcus, good to see you. I've been looking at your latest numbers." They sat at a small conference table where charts and reports were spread out. "Passenger complaints are down 22% since we implemented your new response protocols," Connors noted. "And employee satisfaction scores are up across all departments." "The real test will be sustaining these changes," Marcus replied. "Culture doesn't transform overnight." Connors nodded. "The board is impressed, especially with how you handled the media transition. From crisis to transformation story, that's quite a pivot." It was true. The narrative around Skyway had shifted dramatically. Instead of boycott calls, business publications were now writing about the airline's innovative approach to addressing bias in customer service. "There's something else I wanted to discuss," Connors said, his tone becoming more serious. "I'm creating a new position, Executive Vice President of Customer Experience and Inclusive Operations. It would oversee several departments and report directly to me." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like an important role." "It is," Connors agreed. "And I want you to take it." Marcus was stunned. "Me? I'd only been here 3 months. And in that time, you've shown more insight into our operations than executives who've been here for years," Connors replied. "This wouldn't be a token position, Marcus. You'd have real authority to shape how this airline functions, from crew training to customer service protocols to hiring practices." Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing the offer. When he had first stepped onto that plane 3 months ago, he could never have imagined sitting here now, being offered an executive position at the very airline that had humiliated him. "I'll need full autonomy to implement changes as I see fit," Marcus said, already thinking through the implications. "Of course," Connors nodded. "That's why I want you. You're not afraid to tell us hard truths." "And a seat on the executive leadership team," Marcus added. "If I'm going to drive change, I need to be in the room where decisions are made." "Done," Connors agreed without hesitation. "So, do we have a deal?" Marcus thought about his consulting business. He had built it from nothing into a successful operation. Taking this job would mean stepping away from that, committing himself fully to transforming Skyway from within. It wasn't what he had planned, but sometimes the most important journeys were the unexpected ones. "Yes," Marcus said finally, extending his hand. "We have a deal." Later that evening, Marcus called his sister Tanya to share the news. "Executive Vice President? At the same airline that kicked you off their plane?" Tanya sounded incredulous. "Are you sure about this, Marcus?" Marcus looked out his office window at the sunset painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Planes were taking off and landing, each carrying hundreds of people who deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. "I'm sure," he said confidently. "Sometimes you have to be in the system to change the system." "Well, I'm proud of you," Tanya said. "From getting kicked off a plane to helping run the airline in 3 months, only you could turn something so terrible into something so powerful." Marcus smiled. She was right. This wasn't the path he would have chosen, but perhaps it was the path he was meant to find. 2 years had passed since that fateful day when Marcus Johnson was escorted off a Skyway flight. The memory still brought a twinge of discomfort, but it had faded beneath the weight of all that had followed. Marcus stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Aviation Industry Conference Center. Hundreds of airline executives, industry leaders, and media representatives filled the room, their attention focused entirely on him. "Thank you for this honor," Marcus began, his voice steady as he accepted the Airline Industry Innovation Award. 2 years ago, I never imagined I would be standing here today." A gentle ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Everyone knew his story. It had become legend in the industry, the black veteran who turned discrimination into transformation. "Skyway Airlines is not perfect," Marcus continued honestly. "No organization is. But what sets us apart today is our willingness to acknowledge our flaws and work systematically to address them." From his position at the podium, an impact, Marcus added. "They don't show the young black woman who applied to be a flight attendant because she saw herself reflected in our company, or the Muslim family who chose Skyway for their first trip to America because they heard we treat all passengers with dignity." Marcus paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Many of the people in this room had initially been skeptical of his appointment. Some had predicted that Skyway's new approach would hurt their bottom line. They had been wrong. Doing the right thing and doing the profitable thing are not in conflict, Marcus stated firmly. Skyway's stock price has increased 34% in 2 years. Our customer loyalty scores lead the industry. Turns out, people prefer airlines that treat everyone with respect. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Business success was a language they all understood. As Marcus concluded his speech, he spotted a familiar face in the crowd, Carlos, the young flight attendant who had shown him kindness on that difficult day. Carlos now led Skyway's flight attendant training program, teaching new hires how to provide excellent service to all passengers. After the ceremony, Marcus made his way through the crowd of well-wishers to a quiet corner where his sister Tanya waited. "Quite a speech, little brother," she said, hugging him tightly. "Mom and Dad would have been so proud." Marcus nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. Their parents hadn't lived to see this chapter of his life, but he felt their influence in everything he did. "I have something to show you," he said, pulling out his phone and scrolling to an email. "I received this yesterday." Tanya read the email aloud. "Dear Mr. Johnson, my name is Patricia Winters." She looked up in shock. "The flight attendant. She contacted you?" Marcus nodded. "Keep reading." Tanya continued. "After 2 years of reflection and personal growth, I am writing to apologize for my actions. The bias training program I completed after leaving Skyway forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself. While I can never undo what happened, I wanted you to know that you changed my life too. I now volunteer teaching anti-bias workshops in my community." Tears welled in Tanya's eyes. "Wow, that's unexpected." "That's the thing about transformation," Marcus said quietly. "It ripples outward in ways you can't predict." Later that evening, as Marcus walked through the airport terminal toward his gate, he noticed how different things felt now. As executive vice president of Skyway, he could have used the private executive entrance, but he preferred to experience the airline as regular passengers did. He passed a young black family being welcomed warmly by a Skyway gate agent. He observed flight attendants treating an elderly woman in a hijab with the same courtesy they showed everyone else. These weren't coincidences or photo opportunities. They were the result of systematic changes in hiring, training, and accountability. As Marcus settled into his first-class seat, the same section he'd been told he didn't belong in 2 years earlier, he reflected on how far they had come. The incident that could have been merely another sad story of discrimination had instead become a catalyst for industry-wide change. A flight attendant approached with a warm smile. "Good evening, Mr. Johnson. Welcome aboard. Can I get you something to drink before takeoff?" "Water would be great, thank you," he replied. As the plane took off, Marcus watched the ground fall away below. Sometimes the most important journeys weren't the ones that took you from one city to another, but from one version of the world to a better one. He hadn't set out to transform an airline or an industry. He had simply stood up for what was right, and sometimes that was enough to change everything.